Family rescues. K9, German Shepherd left to die on the highway. Then, something shocking happens. When the Miller family set out for their weekend road trip through rural Tennessee, the last thing they expected was to find a battered, nearly lifeless German Shepherd sprawled beside the highway guardrail, his canine vest torn, his eyes barely open. No ID, no tag. Just a scarred body and a look that begged for one last chance. They could have kept driving. But they stopped. And what they discovered next would unravel a hidden past, ignite a bond that defied all logic, and lead to a moment so powerful it would leave everyone who witnessed it in tears. This isn't just a story about rescue. It's about redemption, loyalty, and the kind of connection that only those who've truly suffered can understand. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring more heartfelt, inspiring stories like this one directly to you. Now, let's begin. The sun was just starting to set over the hills of rural Tennessee, casting golden light across the two-lane highway that twisted through farmland and silence. The Miller family van hummed along the road, windows halfway down, country music low on the radio. Inside, Claire Miller sat in the passenger seat, flipping through a paper map out of habit, while her husband, Ryan, kept his eyes on the road. In the back seat, their 13-year-old son, Jack, stared out the window with his earbuds in, bored and restless. Their weekend getaway had barely started. But then, a flash of fur. Claire gasped. "Ryan, stop the car!" He slammed the brakes. Tires screeched. Dust flew. The van skidded to a halt on the shoulder, just past a sharp curve. "What was it?" Ryan asked, breath catching. Claire was already out the door. There was something by the guardrail. It looked like a dog. Jack yanked off his earbuds and followed, his heartbeat suddenly pounding as he stepped out into the late afternoon heat. The air smelled like dry grass and oil. Then they saw him. Lying half under the twisted metal guardrail, covered in dirt and blood, was a German Shepherd. Big, muscular. But he looked hollow now, his ribs too visible, his fur matted and torn, one ear slashed. His breathing was shallow, uneven. One paw twitched, then went still again. Claire dropped to her knees. "Oh my God." Jack stood frozen. "Is he alive?" Ryan knelt beside them, gently placing 2 fingers on the dog's neck. "Barely. But yeah, he's alive." And then they saw it. A faded canine patch still clung to the shredded tactical vest around his chest. It was torn at the seams, soaked in blood, but unmistakable. "He's a working dog," Ryan muttered. "Police or military?" Claire's voice shook. "Why would a canine be out here alone? Like this?" There were no tire tracks, no people, no ID, just a silent soldier discarded in the dust. Jack knelt slowly, his eyes locking onto the shepherd's. "He's looking at me." The dog's gaze was weak, but it didn't break. There was something in it, something wounded but not gone, like he was still waiting for someone. "We can't leave him," Claire whispered. Ryan hesitated. "We don't even know if he's safe to move. What if he's dangerous? What if he snaps?" But Jack had already taken off his hoodie and was folding it into a makeshift pillow under the dog's head. "He's not dangerous," he said. "He's just broken." Claire nodded. "We take him. Now." Ryan ran back to the van, pulled out an old picnic blanket from the trunk, and the 3 of them carefully slid it under the shepherd's frail frame. He whimpered, just once, but didn't fight them. Together, they lifted him into the back of the van. Jack sat beside him the whole way, hand gently resting on the dog's side. As they drove toward the nearest vet clinic, 25 minutes away, Claire kept calling emergency lines, trying to find out if anyone had reported a missing canine unit. But there was nothing. No alerts, no records, no one looking. Like he had been erased. At the clinic, the vet rushed him into surgery. They said he'd been out there for at least 2 days, maybe more. Internal bruising, lacerations, malnutrition, one bullet fragment lodged near his hip, and yet he survived. He's a fighter, the vet said, and if he makes it through the night, he just might have a chance. That night, the Millers stayed at a roadside motel just a block from the clinic. None of them slept. Jack kept replaying that look the dog gave him, the way he never blinked, never flinched. It wasn't just a look of pain, it was a look of recognition, like maybe the dog had chosen him. The next morning, the vet called. He made it through the night, she said. But there's something you need to see. Claire's stomach dropped. What's his? He has something embedded under his skin, near the shoulder. We ran a scan. There was a pause. It's a military-grade microchip. The vet's office smelled like antiseptic and worn leather. Jack sat on the edge of a hard plastic chair, his legs bouncing with anxious energy, while Claire and Ryan leaned over the reception counter, trying to make sense of what they'd just heard. A military chip? Ryan repeated. Dr. Eliza Grant, a woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes and a calm voice, nodded. Yes, it's embedded under his skin near the scapula, professionally placed. I've only seen that kind of tag in retired military canines. Claire looked at the shepherd, still unconscious behind the glass door of the recovery room. His body was covered in bandages now, but his chest rose and fell steadily. Life was still in him. Can it tell us who he belonged to? Claire asked. Dr. Grant pulled up a screen on her monitor and sighed. That's the strange part. The chip is encrypted. It doesn't link to any civilian registry. We tried standard military protocols, but access was restricted. Jack looked up. So, nobody knows who he is? The vet hesitated. Someone knows, but they're not telling. Ryan frowned. You're saying this dog was erased? Possibly. Or hidden. Jack's heart hammered. Why would someone erase a canine? Dr. Grant met his eyes. That's what worries me. They left the clinic in silence, the late morning sun glaring off the pavement. Jack didn't say much until they got back to the motel. Then he looked at his parents and said, We have to keep him. Ryan blinked. Jack, he could belong to someone. A soldier? A handler? Someone out there may be looking for him. No one is looking, Jack insisted. That's the point. Someone left him out there, and they didn't want him found. Claire exchanged a look with her husband. The truth was hard to argue, but there was a deeper truth in Jack's voice, something fierce and protective that neither parent had heard before. Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. If we keep him, even just for now, there are rules. You help care for him, feed him, clean him. Rehab is going to be tough. I will, Jack said immediately, whatever it takes. The next day, the shepherd was cleared to leave the clinic, though he was still too weak to walk on his own. Jack insisted on carrying him into the back of the van again, careful with every movement. They brought him home. A suburban house in Franklin, Tennessee, fenced yard, cozy porch. Life had always been quiet for the Millers, but now it was different. They named him Shadow, because he moved without sound and because, as Jack said, he came from a place full of secrets. Shadow slept for most of the first week, only stirring for food or water. He flinched at sudden sounds, especially helicopters. He growled low when he heard boots outside the house, even if it was just the mailman. But he never growled at Jack. In fact, the bond between them began to grow like something ancient being rediscovered. Jack read to him at night, talked to him like a friend. One afternoon, while sitting in the backyard, Jack tossed a tennis ball absently. Shadow didn't move. But when Jack said, without thinking, "Fetch it," Shadow shot up. Weak limbs shaking, he bolted after the ball, grabbed it cleanly, and returned to Jack's feet. Both stared at each other. Claire watched from the kitchen window, stunned. "Did you see that?" Jack shouted. "He knows commands, military ones." Ryan stepped out onto the porch. "He's trained, deeply trained." Jack's mind spun. What if he still remembers everything? What if we can bring him all the way back? That night, Jack searched online forums for anything about abandoned canines. The more he read, the more questions surfaced. But one post caught his eye. A retired handler from Fort Bragg wrote, "If you find a dog that's been black-tagged and dumped, be careful. Someone didn't just forget him. Someone wanted him gone." Jack read the line over and over. And that's when he realized Shadow hadn't just been abandoned. He had been silenced. But why? Shadow's eyes began to change. It wasn't just the color or the clarity. It was the way he started watching things again. Calculating. Alert. As if each day pulled a layer of fog from his memory, revealing something sharper underneath. By the end of the second week, he wasn't just eating regularly. He was moving with purpose. Quiet steps across the miller's hardwood floor, long, observant stares through the window at passing cars. He didn't bark. He never barked. But he watched. Always watched. Jack noticed it first. "He waits until I go to bed," he told his mom one morning. "Then he checks all the windows, like he's guarding the house." Claire tried to laugh it off. Maybe he just wants to feel useful. But deep down, she knew it wasn't a game. Shadow wasn't just healing. He was remembering. One Saturday afternoon, Ryan decided to test something. He stepped into the backyard with Shadow and gave a crisp command from an old military canine manual he had found online. "Stand down. Stay alert." Shadow stopped mid-step. His ears pricked. Then, slowly, he sat. Ryan tried another. "Secure perimeter." Shadow stood, paced to the fence, looked outward in both directions, and returned to the center of the yard. Stationary, focused, still. Jack, watching from the sliding door, whispered, "He's a soldier." That night, Jack couldn't sleep. His mind kept turning over one question. What happened to you out there? He pulled out his phone and opened the photo he'd taken of Shadow's vest, zoomed in. There, barely visible beneath the dried blood, was a faint line of stitching where a name tag had once been. Someone had ripped it off. A deliberate erasure. Jack turned the image into a grayscale edit and increased the contrast. Underneath the stitching, a few letters bled through faintly. R-A-K. That was all he could make out. The next day, he brought the image to the local VFW office, pretending it was for a school project. An older veteran named Gus took one look and frowned. "That's an old naming protocol," Gus said, tapping the photo. "That ain't police. That's Special Forces, kid. Delta or CIA joint work. These dogs? They don't go missing by accident." Jack's blood went cold. So someone abandoned him on purpose. Gus nodded. Either he saw something he shouldn't have, or someone didn't want him found. Back at home, Jack relayed everything to his parents. Ryan's expression darkened. "This is bigger than we thought." Claire folded her arms, a protective instinct rising in her chest. "We're not giving him up." "No," Ryan agreed. "But we need to be careful. If someone erased him from the system, and now he's here, someone might come looking." Jack's grip tightened on his phone. "Then we protect him, just like he protects us." That evening, something happened that none of them could explain. A black SUV pulled slowly down their quiet street. Tinted windows. No plates. It didn't stop. just crawled past the Miller home. But Shadow, who had been lying by the front door, stood up instantly, rigid, alert. A growl rumbled low in his chest, the first sound they'd heard from him in days. He moved to the window, watched the SUV until it vanished around the corner, and then sat back down, never looking away from the road. Jack stepped beside him. "You knew them, didn't you?" Shadow didn't answer, of course, but his stillness said everything. He remembered something dangerous, and whatever it wasn't finished yet. The next morning, Jack woke up to something strange. The front door was unlocked. It wasn't like his parents to forget things like that. Ryan always checked the doors before going to bed, every night, like clockwork. Jack rubbed his eyes, walked slowly into the hallway, and noticed Shadow sitting near the threshold, wide awake and rigid, ears perked forward. He hadn't slept, not a second. Jack crouched beside him. "You heard something, didn't you?" Shadow didn't move, but his body was tense, like a wire pulled tight. He stared at the door as if he expected it to open again at any moment. Ryan stepped into the hallway, yawning. "Everything okay?" Jack pointed. Door was unlocked. Ryan's face changed instantly. He checked the handle, the lock, the security camera above the porch, but the feed had been erased. Just static from midnight to 3 o'clock a.m. Claire came down in her robe, holding her phone. "I just checked our Ring app. Last night's data is missing. Gone." Jack looked at Shadow, who still hadn't moved. Someone had been there. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Later that day, Ryan drove out to the old VFW office again. Gus was waiting for him. "Did some digging?" the old man said. "Turns out the military doesn't want to talk about K-9s from off-the-books missions, especially ones connected to Black Ops programs." Ryan raised an eyebrow. Black Ops? Gus handed him a printed article. There were rumors years ago about Namen trained for infiltration and intelligence, not just combat. One particular unit, codename Echo Gray. Their dogs were trained to recognize faces, remember encrypted locations, even escape from captivity. Ryan scanned the file. And what happened to them? They vanished, officially retired. But the handlers? Most of them disappeared. One was reported dead under suspicious circumstances. His name was Captain Marcus Rake. Ryan's eyes widened. Rake. The letters Jack had seen on Shadow's torn vest. "Oh my God," Ryan muttered. It wasn't the dog that vanished, it was his handler. Gus nodded grimly. And if Shadow belonged to him, that means he saw whatever got Rake killed. Back at home, Jack was on the floor with Shadow, brushing his fur gently. He had started to trust again, letting Jack pet him, nuzzle close when thunderstorms hit. He slept beside Jack's bed most nights now. Quiet, watchful. Claire peeked in. "Dinner's ready?" Jack stood, ruffling Shadow's ear. "Be right there." But just as he turned to leave, Shadow suddenly stood up and barked. Once, loud, sharp. His eyes locked on the television, which had accidentally turned on. A news report was playing, a story about a recent military operation overseas. The anchor read a list of names of those presumed missing. One of the names flashed on the screen, Captain Marcus Rake. Jack's jaw dropped. Shadow growled, low and guttural, stepping forward toward the screen like he recognized the name. Jack grabbed the remote and rewound the segment. When the name appeared again, Shadow barked. Twice. "Mom!" Jack shouted. "Come here!" Claire rushed in, alarmed. "What happened?" Jack pointed at the screen. "That's his handler. I know it." Claire's eyes widened. "And if he's listed as missing, then maybe he's not dead." Shadow paced in tight circles now, clearly agitated. He looked between Jack and the door like he was trying to communicate something urgent. Ryan arrived moments later, holding the Echo Gray file Gus had given him. "I think this dog saw something," he said, and they tried to erase him for it. Claire stared at Shadow. "But he survived. And now they know he's here," Ryan added. "They erased the footage. That wasn't a coincidence." A cold silence fell over the room. Jack knelt beside Shadow. "You remember him, don't you?" The dog looked into his eyes. Deep, clear. Then Shadow walked slowly to the back door, sat down, and stared at the horizon. He wasn't just recovering anymore, he was waiting. For what? Or for who? By now, Shadow had become more than just part of the Miller family. He was a presence. Quiet, protective, almost strategic. Jack noticed it most. Every morning, before anyone else was awake, Shadow would sit at the same window, facing the backyard and the wooded ridge beyond. He wasn't watching squirrels or birds. He was tracking, waiting, alert. But that morning, something changed. Jack had started experimenting. He printed a map of the region around Franklin and placed it on the floor. Shadow glanced at it, then did something strange. He placed his paw on it. Jack froze. "Are you showing me something?" Shadow looked up, and for a brief second, Jack felt like the dog understood. He zoomed in on the area with a pencil, then circled the place where Shadow had placed his paw. A forested stretch of state-owned land about 10 miles out. Nothing marked, just deep woods. That afternoon, Ryan reviewed the Echo Gray file again, obsessing over details. One page stood out now. Final recon training location. Class F perimeter. Ridge 14, Sector B. Claire read over his shoulder. "Isn't that near the woods just outside town?" Ryan looked up slowly. "Yeah, exactly where Shadow pointed." They all sat in stunned silence. "If he was trained in that sector," Ryan said, "maybe there's something he remembers, something he wants us to see." Jack didn't hesitate. "We have to go." Ryan hesitated. "If there's danger..." "I'm not leaving him alone with this," Jack said firmly. The next morning, just after sunrise, they drove out to the ridge. The area was mostly overgrown, with patches of rusted fencing and remnants of concrete slabs long swallowed by moss and vines. Shadow jumped out of the truck the moment the door opened. His posture changed. Back straight, eyes scanning, ears fully perked. The air shifted. He knew this place. He led them in silence, weaving through thick brush and past fallen trees like he had memorized every step. And then he stopped, in front of an old trap door, half buried beneath leaves and dirt. Ryan brushed it clean. Faded lettering on the metal read, "Training Substation Echo Gray." Jack's heart raced. Shadow growled low, pawing at the latch. With a creak, Ryan pulled the door open. A cold breath of air emerged from the dark. Inside, they found a staircase leading down into what looked like an abandoned concrete bunker. Claire's voice trembled. "This place isn't on any map." With flashlights in hand, they descended into silence. The air smelled of dust and forgotten time. Along the walls were scratched-in words, symbols, and one painted image. A German shepherd, painted like a mural, wearing a vest. Below it, in faded red paint, were the words, "He remembers what we don't." They walked deeper, passing broken crates, water tanks, a cracked monitor still bolted to the wall. In one room, there was a row of lockers, most empty, but one still had a worn name tag on the front, Captain M. Rake. Jack's breath caught. He opened it slowly. Inside was a duffel bag. Inside that, a journal, dog tags, and a single photo. It was of Captain Rake, kneeling beside a younger version of Shadow. Both of them looked strong, focused, bonded. Jack turned the photo around. On the back was a set of handwritten coordinates. Ryan took out his phone and punched them in. His face went pale. "These coordinates are in Afghanistan, deep in the mountains." Claire whispered, "What if he didn't die?" "What if he's still there?" Jack said. "And Shadow's been trying to tell us all along." Shadow stepped forward, nudging the photo gently. And in that moment, it was clear. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a mission, and Shadow was still trying to complete it. The following days were a whirlwind. The Millers brought the journal and photo to a local veterans group with connections overseas. Ryan contacted Gus again at the VFW, and together they reached out to someone Gus trusted. An ex-CIA liaison named Doug Whitmore, who now worked in private security. When Doug saw the photo and the coordinates, his face went still. "This isn't just a training record," he said. "This is evidence of a failed extraction, a blackout mission. If Captain Rake is still alive, someone's been covering it up for years." Ryan stared at him. "Why would they do that?" Doug hesitated. "Because missions like Echo Gray weren't meant to exist. And survivors? Survivors complicate the narrative." Jack clenched his fists. "So we just leave him there?" "No," Doug said slowly. "But if we want the truth, we go off-grid." Claire stood up. "We're not soldiers." Doug looked at her. "You don't need to be, but he is." He looked down at Shadow, who was lying at Jack's feet, ears perked. "He remembers where to go. He was trained to, but it's up to you whether we follow." Ryan and Claire spent that night talking in hushed voices behind closed doors. Jack didn't sleep. He sat beside Shadow on the back porch, tracing the photo of Captain Rake under the moonlight. "I know he's out there," Jack whispered. "I can feel it. And I think you can too." Shadow looked up at him, silent and steady. By sunrise, the decision was made. Doug arranged for a contact in Kabul, a former medic turned humanitarian who had ties to the area near the coordinates. It would be dangerous, remote. But if there was a chance Rake was alive, they had to try. Ryan made one condition. Jack stayed behind. Jack exploded. "No way! He needs me!" "He needs you alive," Ryan said. "You helped bring him this far. Now let us take it the rest of the way." Reluctantly, Jack agreed, but only if Doug promised to keep him updated every step. 3 days later, Ryan and Doug arrived in Afghanistan. The terrain was brutal. Jagged mountains, thin air, villages made of dust and stone. They traveled with Shadow through winding canyons and long-forgotten trails. Each time they got turned around, Shadow corrected them, following instincts buried under years of silence. Then one afternoon, high in the mountains, Shadow stopped. He sniffed the wind, ears forward, tail stiff. He led them to a small, half-collapsed shelter built into the side of a cliff. Inside, behind a rusted steel door, they found him. Captain Marcus Rake. Alive, barely. He was weak, with a long beard and sunken eyes. But when Shadow stepped into the light, everything changed. Rake sat upright, stunned. Ragnar? It was the first time they'd heard the name. Shadow let out a soft whine and padded forward slowly. Rake's eyes filled with tears. "You came back." He reached out a trembling hand, and Shadow pressed his head into it. Doug turned to Ryan, whispering, "We're witnessing something no one was ever meant to see." Rake explained everything. His team had been ambushed. He was left behind when a chopper pulled out early. Shadow had tried to stay, but was ordered to retreat. "I gave him the last command I ever spoke. Go," and he obeyed. They left Rake for dead, and the mission was buried. Until now. With medical assistance and a long journey home, Captain Rake returned to U.S. soil. The Millers met him at the airstrip. Jack ran forward the second he saw them. Shadow leapt from the carrier and bolted toward Jack, not because he forgot Rake, but because both of them were now home. Rake walked slowly, aided by a cane, until he stood face to face with the boy who'd saved his partner. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever," he said, voice rough with emotion. Jack looked up. "We didn't save him. He saved himself. We just listened." And as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Shadow sat between them, tail still, ears high, eyes bright. The mission was over, but the journey was far from done. 2 months after Captain Marcus Rake stepped back onto American soil, the town of Franklin, Tennessee, looked completely different to him. Not because the streets had changed, but because he had. After 2 years of isolation, betrayal, and pain, he wasn't the same man who had disappeared in the Afghan mountains. But when he looked at Shadow, Ragnar as he had once been known, he saw something familiar. Not just a partner, a survivor, a mirror of everything he had endured. The Millers had turned their quiet home into something sacred. The front porch now had a custom-built dog ramp, courtesy of a local carpenter. The backyard was sectioned with obstacles, tires, and a long gravel path, where Shadow, though still favoring one leg, could run again. And run he did. Every morning at sunrise, Jack would open the back door, and Shadow would sprint out, make a circle around the yard, and sit at attention near the old tree stump. It became his new post, his new mission. Captain Rake had moved into a nearby guest cottage arranged by the local veterans group. He visited the Millers daily, not as a broken man, but as someone slowly piecing himself back together. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Washington. Ryan opened it first, his hands trembling slightly. After reading it, he looked at Rake and simply said, "You need to read this." The letter was from the Department of Defense, a quiet, carefully worded apology. An acknowledgment, not public but personal, that Echo Gray had existed, that its survivors had been strategically disavowed to protect the integrity of classified operations. Captain Marcus Rake was officially reinstated, and Shadow was awarded a Medal of Valor. The medal arrived in a small wooden box with no press, no photographers, just a velvet ribbon and a brief note. To K-9 Unit Ragnar, for loyalty beyond command. Jack placed the medal on Shadow's collar himself. "I think he always knew," Jack said, "that he never stopped serving." A week later, the town organized a quiet ceremony. Not official, not military, just people. Neighbors, veterans, and kids who had followed the story and wanted to say, "Thank you." Rake stood at the podium, eyes scanning the small crowd. He cleared his throat. "They called it a ghost mission, said we'd be forgotten. But this dog, he never forgot. Not the orders, not the bond, not me." He looked down at Shadow, sitting proudly at his side. "I survived because he obeyed the hardest command any soldier can give. Leave me behind." And then he found a way to come back. He turned to the Millers. "And you listened when the world didn't. You saw a broken creature and gave him something most people overlook. Trust." Claire wiped her eyes. Ryan put his arm around her shoulders. Jack beamed. After the speech, as the crowd thinned out and dusk settled over the park, Jack sat on a bench beside Shadow, gently rubbing his ear. "You're not just a hero," he said. "You're family now." Shadow leaned into him, letting out a quiet sigh. Captain Rake approached slowly, watching the two of them. "He chose you for a reason," Rake said. Jack looked up. "Why do you think that is?" Rake thought for a moment, then said, "Because soldiers recognize something in each other, even if you've never worn the uniform." Jack smiled. "Maybe I did, in another life." They both laughed softly. That night, as the Millers gathered for dinner, Shadow curled up in his usual spot under the table, tail thumping against the floor every time Jack laughed. He was home. Not the kind built from concrete and steel, but the kind built from love, second chances, and quiet, loyal presence. And as the night settled in, and the wind whispered through the trees, Captain Rake stepped onto the porch, staring up at the stars. He placed a hand on Shadow's metal, then whispered to the dark, "Mission complete." If this story inspired you, remember, courage, loyalty, and compassion can rebuild even the most broken souls. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who still believes in second chances.